Another day, another banger. Welcome to the full recap of the new series Mobland, starring none other than Tom Hardy. This one's packed with grit, tension, and raw power. You won't want to miss a second, so buckle up because this recap starts right now. The Doans and the Lazaros go way back, 30 years deep in blood, favors, and unspoken debts. But all that history's rotting in the rearview now. What's left are two family heads staring each other down like it's the final round in a prize fight no one's paying to see. Whatever goodwill they had has been burned to ash. Harry D'Souza, mediator for hire, straight out of the Harrigan stable. He's here to play peacemaker, but it's like trying to defuse a bomb using a wet sponge. The two patriarchs manage a handshake barely, but apologies are off the table, pride still doing all the talking. Harry's caught between two ticking time bombs and someone handed him a rubber mallet instead of wire cutters. Conrad Harrigan, king of his little empire, watches the whole charade from behind the curtain. He knows a patched-up truce isn't peace, it's just a pause before the next funeral. So he makes the only play he trusts. He has Harry shoot everyone, including both gangs, with no warning. Sometimes diplomacy is just bullets in better suits. While the grown-ups clean up bodies and lick wounds, the kids are busy lighting new fires. Eddie Harrigan, Conrad's grandson, is the worst kind of legacy, entitled, unhinged, and untouchable. He floats through London like he owns the place, flashing the family name like it's diplomatic immunity. His current sidekick, Tommy Stevenson, son of Richie, Conrad's biggest rival in the city. The family feud just got a couple of teenage pyromaniacs. Eddie and Tommy hit the clubs hard, partying like trust funds are eternal, but Eddie, being Eddie, doesn't just start fights. He finishes them with a knife. Huey, some poor kid who made the mistake of breathing near him, gets stabbed in the middle of the dance floor. Tommy's spooked, furious, suddenly realizing he might be next. Eddie throws the knife into the River Thames and disappears. Back at the Harrigan estate, Conrad's by the river pretending to enjoy retirement with a fishing rod and dead eyes. Then his childhood friend Archie shows up, dragging decades of family rot with him. Maeve, ever charming, takes one look at Archie and mistakes him for their dead sibling. Proof that in this family everyone's a ghost, even the living. Outside, the brothers share war stories. Fishing lessons from Uncle Tommy, who turned out to be a creep. Childhood scars dressed up as nostalgia. The talk shifts to business, fentanyl, quick cash, and the ticking clock of mortality. Archie warns that Richie won't like this move, but Conrad shrugs because war doesn't scare him, it's boredom he can't stomach. Then there's Eddie, the walking scandal, because this stabbing wasn't his first time he caused trouble. His father Kevin finally caves and calls Harry to sort it out. Harry shows up, already over it, and skips the small talk. He lays it out for Eddie: work with me or enjoy 10 years behind bars. Unlike Kevin, Harry doesn't sugarcoat it. He knows spoiled kids don't need coddling, but rather they need a cold splash of reality. Eddie offers up details about the club, carefully edited of course, leaves out Tommy. Harry heads straight to the scene and a fake badge gets him through the doors. The club boss isn't in the mood to help until Harry casually mentions the Harrigan name and drops a few thinly veiled threats. Soon enough, Harry's watching CCTV of the stabbing and finds out that the kid who got the blade is Huey Campbell. Barely alive and recovering at Homerton Memorial, Harry deletes the footage and walks out like it's just another Tuesday. Somewhere else, a woman named Jan is sitting in a therapy circle playing emotional roulette. The therapist asks if someone comes to mind, but Jan hesitates and doesn't say who. Harry, meanwhile, is back in his car, already juggling his next move. He dials a contact in the police, trying to see if Huey's talked. He also taps into someone at the hospital. Jan grabs a coffee afterward and bumps into Alice, another therapy dropout. They bond over their mutual belief that therapy's just overpriced whining. Two strangers, one shared disappointment and zero healing. Harry finds out Huey hasn't been interviewed yet and figures that it's time to make a house call. He drops in on the kid who's pale, stitched up, and already regretting his night out. Harry leans in and lets him know he wasn't stabbed by Eddie, because if Eddie had really stabbed him, he'd be getting zipped into a body bag. The not-so-subtle message is clear. Forget what you saw or things will get worse, and of course Huey folds like cheap origami. With the crisis averted, Harry loops in Kevin and tells him that the problem is solved and his blood pressure can rest now. For the final details, Harry disposes of the clothes Eddie wore by planting them on some poor John Doe in the morgue. It's not evidence if it's already on a corpse. Over in Richie's world, things are heating up as his partner Vron is breathing down his neck, demanding answers about Tommy. The kid's gone AWOL, and the timeline's starting to look damning. Richie starts connecting dots fast. He calls Kevin next, voice like a loaded gun, warning that if Tommy's not home by nightfall, there'll be hell to pay. The kind that doesn't stop with a few bodies. Meanwhile, Harry's personal life is unraveling in real time. He and Jan are circling the drain, arguing on repeat. Their daughter Gina is the human buffer between two ticking time bombs. She tries to play peacekeeper, but therapy won't fix what both parents are too stubborn to admit is broken. Jan's pushing for counseling and Harry's pushing back hard. She continues to beg and he continues to try and convince her out of it like a stone wall. Eventually, he just agrees that she can book it and he'll work around it, which is code for leave me alone. Jan knows that routine. It's a stall tactic dressed as compromise. Harry's got a fire to put out, and this one's burning straight through the floorboards. Richie's circling like a shark, and if Tommy doesn't resurface soon, it's war. Eddie's not exactly helping either. The kid clams up like he's allergic to accountability. So Conrad, ever the strategist with a couple abnormal complexes, decides to bring everyone together at Moody's boxing gym. Neutral ground, clean gloves, and dirty intentions. Moody's gym isn't just where knuckleheads throw punches, it's where crime lords resolve pressing issues without blowing holes in each other. Moody plays Switzerland with muscles, turning gang conflict into a business model. 50 grand up front from each side, all phones handed in, and one golden rule: no threats, no violence. Any blood hits the floor, Moody keeps the deposit. In other words, it's Fight Club for men who file taxes under shell companies. For now, it's just Richie and Harry in the ring. Everyone else, goons, muscle, and twitchy trigger fingers, wait outside. Harry's already playing chess while the rest are still unfolding the board. He quietly orders his men to keep the crosshairs locked on Richie's crew. One nod from Conrad and this whole peace talk becomes a closed casket seminar. Richie turns on the charm, sugarcoating Harry with enough butter to drown a lobster, trying to woo him over to his camp, but Harry doesn't bite. He knows a velvet glove still hides a clenched fist. Richie's bluff is simple: either he talks to Eddie, or things get loud and bloody by noon tomorrow. That's the ticking clock now, and Harry's got less than 24 hours before all hell breaks loose. So he calls Conrad, gives him the option: greenlight the hit, take Richie out now, and skip the rest of the mess. But Conrad hesitates. For a man who built an empire from concrete and corpses, he suddenly gets philosophical. Maeve, ever the cooler head, steps in and tells him this isn't the time or the place. That night, the Harrigan estate starts filling up with ghosts in expensive coats. Conrad's daughter Serafina shows up, dragging Brendan along for the ride. Maeve can't stand her disapproval written all over her face like a bad foundation. Kevin shows up too, noticeably without Eddie. It's a full table, minus the one idiot who caused all this chaos. Even the family lawyers make an appearance. When the suits show up, it's never for hugs. Conrad lays it all out, his blueprint, his long con. Word on the street says he's slipping, that Richie's pulled ahead by locking in a fat deal with the Mexicans, carving out a slice of the fentanyl market. But Conrad's not behind, he's playing the long game. The idea was always to let Richie waltz in, make friends with the cartel, and then lowball a better offer once Richie's out of the picture. No need to compete if your rival's face down in a ditch. Why run a race when you can break the other guy's legs first? Only problem is, the rot's already inside the walls. Maeve pulls Conrad aside for a little fireside betrayal chat. She drops a bomb: Archie's been feeding Richie intel, playing both sides like a hedge fund. He's not just disloyal, he's dangerous. Conrad gives him a test, a final shot at redemption, and Archie fails spectacularly. The shot rings out and Archie hits the ground, lifeless and leaking. Conrad doesn't stick around to admire his work. He walks off rattled, brushing off Maeve's hand like it burns. The king just executed his own blood, and suddenly the crown feels a little heavier. Upstairs he disappears into the silence, but there's no peace waiting for him. Only the creeping realization that family's just another liability, and trust is the fastest way to get killed. Turns out the only thing more dangerous than enemies is relatives with ambition. Harry stands in the shadow of what's left of Archie, taking in the aftermath with a cold stare and a quieter mind. There's blood to wipe, a trail to clean, and questions that won't stop circling his head. Kevin fills in the blanks. He's just as shaken, just as blindsided by what went down, and between the two of them there's a history. Prison friends turned lifelong allies. Their bond predates all this Harrigan mess, and it's the same connection that earned Harry a seat at the table in the first place. Still, a life like this, it takes chunks out of you, and lately Harry's looking like he's been carved hollow. Later that night things go sideways. Armed police storm Harry's place like it's a cartel hideout. Guns raised, voices sharp, handcuffs snapped on. But Harry doesn't resist. He goes quietly, almost like he expected it. He knows the drill, knows O'Hara's coming, and that the long-serving Harrigan lawyer will pry him loose within hours. At the station, Harry meets Detective Fisk, a man with the kind of eyes that don't blink often and a voice honed for bad news. He lays it out clean. The Harrigans are a sinking ship, and this is Harry's lifeboat if he wants it. He probes about Archie too, but Harry doesn't bite. As dawn cracks open, Richie corners Kevin on the road. He's got questions, and none of them are polite. He starts by asking where the hell is Tommy. Kevin, however, keeps his cool, but Richie isn't a man who likes dead air. He gives him 1 hour to sort it all, then he'll be back with more than words. It's like a Yelp review from Satan: polite tone, deadly implications. Kevin doesn't wait to test that timer. He calls Bella and puts a plan in motion. Eddie has to be moved now, and he taps 2 of Harry's men to ferry him out to the Cotswolds. What follows is anything but smooth. Richie's crew gives chase through narrow country roads, turning the English countryside into a getaway scene. It's close, real close, but Eddie makes it back to the estate in one piece, even if everyone's nerves are frayed down to the bone. Meanwhile, O'Hara walks into the station and pulls Harry out just like he promised. But something isn't right. The arrest, the timing, Fisk-pointed questions, none of this happened by chance. There's a leak somewhere. Someone feeding the police just enough to stir the pot, and both men know it. O'Hara suspects Maeve, but Harry's not sold on it yet. Of course, neither of them are ready to make another Archie-sized mistake without proof. Instead of drawing a gun, they decide to start digging. What they don't know is that's exactly what Fisk wants. Rattle Harry, let him sniff out the traitor himself, and when he makes contact, the police follow the trail. It's clever, dirty but clever. Elsewhere, Brendan pays a visit to his half-sister Serafina, ready with some half-baked plan to earn back their father's trust. She doesn't even let him get through the pitch. The moment he opens his mouth, she hits him with every failure he's tried to forget. And then, just to add to the dysfunction, he makes a creepy comment about his sister that could win awards for worst statements ever. She throws his ambition back in his face and tells him in no uncertain terms that he doesn't have the stones for this life. If cringe were currency, Brendan could buy back the family mansion. Later, O'Hara and Harry show up at the estate where Conrad's itching to retaliate. Harry stalls the fire, pulls Conrad aside, and brings up the police incident. He promises to get to the truth about the mole, about Archie, and Conrad, still haunted by the choice he made, mutters that maybe he should have just cut out Archie's tongue instead of ending him outright. Upstairs, Harry checks in on Eddie and lays it out. CCTV footage shows him with Tommy. Eddie caves and finally gives names. Two rich boys from Westminster, Alfie King and Jack Wiley. It's enough of a breadcrumb for Harry to chase, and he wastes no time heading toward Richie, hoping to calm things down. Harry ends up finding Richie at the bar, but there's no peace to offer. Richie isn't playing diplomat anymore as he slams down photos of Gina, Harry's daughter, at school, each one laced with a veiled threat. He even weaves in a bizarre anecdote involving Burger King and teenage creepiness, proving he's got no filter and even less sanity. He wants Tommy, and if Harry doesn't deliver, Gina's safety is gone. Threatening a man's kid is a great way to fast-track your own funeral. Back home, things aren't much better. Jan's had enough of the half-truths and hollow reassurances. She's talking to solicitors, possibly even divorce, and Harry's on thin ice. She knows something's wrong with Gina, but Harry lies, says everything's fine, but the walls are starting to buckle. Harry then visits Isabella, Kevin's wife. Earlier, she tried brokering a deal between her father, a government minister, and a French businessman named Antoine. The meeting didn't exactly turn out as planned. Her father took cheap shots at her age and implied she was out of her depth. She's still trying to land the deal, but the timing's brutal, and with everything else going on, her head's clearly elsewhere. She invites him to stay with her at the hotel with some rather nasty ideas in her head. He declines, of course, since he's got too many fires to put out already. Eventually, Harry tracks down Jack and Alfie. They talk a big game, but when it comes to actual answers about Tommy, they're vague. Spoiled, rich, and only halfway clued in, their intel is just enough to confirm Harry's worst fear. Tommy's mixed up in something bigger than any of them thought. Back at the estate, Maeve corners Eddie and reminds him who raised him, who cleaned up his vomit, wiped his tears, and trained him in the dark arts of Harrigan's survival. He's hers, she claims, a proper Harrigan. But Conrad isn't buying the sentimental pitch. He calls Eddie a toe rag and reminds everyone that only one person makes decisions in this family. And it's not the lady playing therapist with a vendetta. Time's running out and Harry finally arrives at the club where everything began unraveling. He storms in with his fists flying and his rage barely contained. He demands to know where Tommy is, and the manager gives in and sends him to the basement. And there it is, the end of the line. Tommy's dead, stuffed in a box like a package no one wanted to sign for. Harry barely has time to process the last gut punch before the sky lights up. Kevin's house goes up in a massive explosion that rips through the night like the universe just screamed, "Enough already." Moments later, Kevin calls, rattled but alive, and drops the bombshell that Richie has finally made his move and isn't playing anymore. With Tommy's body now found and the threat creeping closer by the second, Harry tells Kevin to meet him at the yard, and to bring Eddie along too. Meanwhile, Richie's goons pay a little visit to Harry's place, probably expecting intimidation to do the job, but what they get is Harry on speaker with Conrad, coldly reminding them who they're dealing with. Since Harry knows exactly who they are and who they answer to, he warns that if they even breathe wrong, they'll be nothing more than smudges on a map. 2 men, 1 mission, 0 brain cells. That's all it takes, just the threat. And suddenly the 2 tough guys are pretending they never saw anything at all. Harry, needing a safe place to regroup, heads off to crash with Mike, an old friend who's now reluctantly doubling as an unwilling Airbnb host. Mike, a sports writer and failed gambler who owes Harry £30,000, isn't thrilled to see him, but he doesn't have much say in the matter. Harry parks Gina and Jan on Mike's boat for safekeeping while he gears up to untangle the mess tightening around them. Down at the yard, Harry meets Kevin and Eddie with a particularly gruesome exhibit. Valjean, the club owner, tied to a chair and looking like life has already chewed him up and spit him back out. Next to him is the unmissable stomach-churning sight of Tommy's body, brutalized and lifeless. According to Valjean, Eddie had offered him 10 grand to deal with Huey, and part of that plan involved bringing both Tommy and Eddie back to the club together. Tommy came back all right, but Eddie was a no-show, and Tommy wound up stabbed at least 50 times. 50 times, that's not murder. That's a damn art project. Kevin, consumed by rage, tasers Eddie and demands answers. As the voltage cools down, Kevin calls Conrad to report the truth, but Maeve, circling like a hawk in the room, catches wind. Instead of disgust or horror, she smirks like a proud school mum at a twisted science fair. She even wants Conrad to feel proud too. He doesn't bite though. Instead, he hangs up and invites Maeve to the sauna because apparently nothing says family murder debrief like sweating it out in a wooden box. In the sweat-soaked hush of the sauna, the two plot their next move. Maeve floats the idea of going after Vron, Richie's girlfriend, to use her as leverage, while Conrad leans more toward brute force, talking about arming everyone and gutting Richie's crew from the inside. Maeve, calling herself the White Queen, reminds Conrad and herself that she's been a player in this game from the start, chess, but everyone's drunk and the pieces stab back. Meanwhile, Harry makes a detour to a care home, honoring a promise to Maria, his maid, to get her mother a comfortable place to live. He shows up late naturally, but knows how to grease wheels with a bribe and a smile. As he's leaving, he spots a familiar face, one of the violent prison guards from his time inside. Harry doesn't act on the old grudge, but the ghost lingers, and unfortunately, someone snaps pictures of him on his way out, feeding the growing shadow tailing his every move. Back at the shipyard, reinforcements arrive in the form of check muscle, ready to lend firepower. Kevin, however, has his eyes elsewhere, on Isabella. Something isn't right with her. She's orchestrating a meet between her father and Antoine, a French businessman with shadowy intentions. Isabella, deeply unhappy in her marriage and clearly playing a long game, is trying to get leverage while also seeking vengeance against her father, who's never treated her like more than an expendable pawn. In that meeting, Isabella's dad throws out a telling line: he can get anyone in front of anyone for the right price. The entire interaction is being filmed on a secret camera Isabella set up with Antoine, but Antoine decides to make a copy for insurance, using it to blackmail her into staying on script. Nothing says trust like recording your father for blackmail and still getting played. Back with Harry and Kevin, they prepare to kill Valjean, but decide instead to use him. They run a textbook good cop bad cop routine, twisting the screws just enough to make Valjean crack and agree to help them, especially with his family's lives now at stake. At Conrad's estate, Eddie slinks back in, drawing ice-cold glares from Serafina and a long list of grievances from Brendan. Maeve strolls in, humming like it's open mic night and heaping praise on Eddie while simultaneously jabbing at Serafina. Serafina, ever ready with the smoke, reminds Maeve she only married into the family and never made the cut to play judge. The Harrigan bloodline politics is less Game of Thrones and more of a passive-aggressive brunch. After the family sparring match, Conrad leaves with Serafina, who bluntly asks if Eddie really did kill Tommy. She knows it's a flashpoint that will push Richie to declare war. Conrad, maintaining the illusion of control, sidesteps the question, but everyone knows the clock's ticking. Harry then places a call to Richie, dropping the news that Tommy's dead and pinning the blame squarely on Valjean. The move is designed to redirect the police too, using a quick car switcheroo with Kevin to throw off their tail. As the cops chase the decoy car, an anonymous tip leads them to Archie Hammond's buried body, which they dig up. Another body, another mess. Harry delivers a bloodied Valjean to Richie, claiming he's the killer. Richie, unconvinced but intrigued, prepares to torture him until the truth leaks out, or until something breaks, whichever comes first. Either way, Harry knows the only thing worse than failing Richie is lying to him. Back in the city, Bella calls Harry to her hotel room, shaken and embarrassed about the blackmail situation. She confesses what's happened, and Harry, ever the fixer, promises to handle it. Just before he leaves, Bella floats a bittersweet what-if, describing an alternate universe where they kiss and none of this chaos exists. Harry almost leans in, tempted by the escape, but reality drags him back. He walks away, knowing the game has changed and things are about to get a whole lot worse. Harry storms in to see Antoine, and after some light verbal strangulation, the Frenchman hands over the memory card, along with the backup copy he thought was clever to stash. But Antoine, in a wildly miscalculated move, tries to bribe Harry with 40 grand, assuming cash could outweigh loyalty. Spoiler alert, Antoine didn't like how that ended. Harry slams the money back in his mouth and exits like a man who's allergic to betrayal and bad offers. Next stop is the boat where Jan and Gina are holed up. Jan, already fed up with the constant cloak and dagger lifestyle, tells Harry off for always being knee-deep in drama. Gina, who's clearly heard this rant before, slides on her headphones like a teenager blocking out a parental lecture. Harry tries to explain what he's been doing, but Jan cuts him off with her personal trio of dislikes, which includes cats, swimming, and knowing anything about his work. She's fine with being in the dark as long as she gets to stay in her corner of normal. She also wants to go home, and while Harry resists at first, he finally agrees. Over at the Harrigan estate, Conrad gets a call. Archie's body has been found. Immediately spooked, he turns to Maeve, who jumps at the opportunity to stir the pot. She's quick to point out that only two people knew where Archie was buried, Conrad and Harry. While Conrad insists there has to be another explanation, Maeve spins it into a conspiracy, suggesting Harry was working undercover the whole time. She claims it's no coincidence that the cops called him in right after the burial. Conrad, however, isn't ready to buy what she's selling and defends Harry fiercely, but Maeve pushes harder. Eventually, Conrad gives in just enough to call Paul and give him an ominous new task. Harry, meanwhile, checks in on Kevin, and the two sit around anxiously waiting for Valjean to resurface. That's when a man named Donnie drops by the garage looking for Harry. The name means nothing to Harry, but what raises eyebrows is Donnie's mention of Zosha. Still, Harry shrugs it off, claiming ignorance. Back at the yard, Harry and Kevin dig into some history. Specifically, the nasty piece of work Harry saw at the care home, a prison guard named Rusby. Kevin claims the name doesn't ring a bell, but his poker face is a little too polished. When someone says they don't know a guy and blinks like Morse code, they probably know the guy. While all this unfolds, Jan is solo at couples therapy again. She paints a picture of Harry as capable, loyal, and loving, but with two families, her and Gina, and then the Harrigans, who always come first. After the session, Jan reaches out to Alice for coffee, likely to blow off steam. But unbeknownst to her, Conrad and Maeve have eyes everywhere. They've got Jan followed and are keeping close tabs on both her and Harry. As Kevin and Harry continue killing time and waiting for Richie's inevitable move, the conversation veers toward Bella. Kevin explains she's still holed up at the hotel, refusing to return to the Harrigan mansion. Then comes the bombshell. Bella and Conrad had a thing. Apparently, Bella used to visit the house and ended up in Conrad's bed a few times. Maeve told Kevin, who then confirmed it with Bella herself. They'd met at Cheltenham, and despite being 50, Conrad was juggling 6 or 7 women. Bella climbed the ladder, and after Maeve found out, things soured. Eventually, she ended up with Kevin, who let it go for the sake of the family, especially since they already had Eddie by then. Harrigan family tree, more like a soap opera written by a chimpanzee. Back on the sidewalk, Jan and Alice finish their coffee catch-up. Alice, subtly pushing her agenda fills Jan's head with doubts. Just as they reach Jan's apartment, Conrad shows up and turns the charm on Alice. But the moment she leaves, that charm curdles into menace. He leans into Jan, reminds her that Harry is family, and not so subtly warns her against exposing their marriage. It's clear she's being watched, and just as clear that she's scared out of her mind once he's gone. That evening, Richie calls Harry and tells him to come alone at midnight. Harry gives Conrad and Kevin the heads up but assures them there's nothing to worry about. Before heading off, he returns home and finds out from Jan that Conrad has been sniffing around. More interestingly, Alice is actually an undercover cop, and Conrad's creepy flirtation has accidentally created a way in. But it's a high-risk play with everything on the line. Back at the estate, Maeve is nurturing Eddie like he's her favorite unstable grenade. Eddie wonders if people hate him, and Maeve, ever the manipulator, feeds him sweet little lies about how adored he is. When he brings up Kevin and Harry, Maeve dismisses them outright. She reassures him they're exactly where they need them. As the puppet master behind the curtain, Maeve reveals her frustration with Conrad's lack of aggression while the Stevensons climb the power ladder. She hypes Eddie up, telling him that slicing up Tommy was a message, and the next one is coming soon. Later that night, Harry drops off the memory stick and it's copied to Bella. But she's not backing off the deal. Instead, she calls Antoine to set everything up. As Harry heads out, he crosses paths with Kevin on the stairs. Things are icy between Bella and Kevin, and the affection now feels like a performance neither of them are enjoying. In the car, Kevin reveals what we already suspected. He does know who Rusby is. The man had abused him in prison, and while the show doesn't outright say it, I'm sure we know what type of trauma he's suffering from. Kevin didn't tell Harry, not because he didn't remember, but because the pain was too real. Finally, Harry meets Richie. Valjean is somehow still breathing, but Richie has other plans. He hands Harry a knife and has him stab the man over and over, testing his loyalty and commitment. Harry doesn't flinch, doesn't hesitate, and even offers to clean up the mess afterward. Richie, satisfied for now, believes the story about the club owner, but he's not done. He wants the entire Harrigan crew to show up for Tommy's funeral. Kevin and Harry sit down to unpack Richie's twisted little invitation. The whole family's expected to attend Tommy's funeral in the wake that follows, and while they both immediately clock it as an obvious trap, the frustrating part is that there's no real way out of it. Show up and risk walking into a war zone, or skip it and hand Richie the narrative. The conversation soon heads into darker territory when Harry brings up Rusby again. Kevin, who had previously played dumb, finally admits he does remember the guy, and it's not a casual memory either. It turns out Rusby was the prison guard who assaulted Kevin back in the day. He doesn't say this outright, but the weight of it is all over his face, and Harry, reading between the lines, doesn't push. He simply reveals that he knows where Rusby is, but before they can make a move, Conrad calls them out to the Cotswolds for what he dramatically labels a council of war. On the road there, Jan learns for the first time that they'll be attending Tommy's funeral. Her gut tells her it's a terrible idea, because of course it is, but the moment she hears Bella's name mentioned among the attendees, her whole attitude does a 180. Jealousy. The one emotion that can overpower common sense. At the council meeting, Harry reluctantly admits that Richie's maneuver is, in his own words, brilliant. It's a checkmate move. Whether they show up or not, they lose. Kevin believes the funeral and wake won't lead to violence outright, but will be a public spectacle designed to shame and dominate the Harrigans. Richie, heartbroken and vengeful, isn't out for blood yet. He just wants to show the world who's on top. Still, if they go, they need to tread carefully. Harry warns against drinking too much, especially in Eddie's case, because when Eddie drinks, chaos is never far behind. To cover their bases, Harry comes up with a contingency plan involving some smuggled hardware just in case things turn south. The decision is made, they'll attend, but they won't go in unprepared. Maeve and Eddie are both loudly opposed to the idea, convinced it's a trap and calling Conrad a fool for considering it. But Conrad, as always, doesn't listen to advice unless it comes dressed in Armani and carrying a bottle of single malt. Fortunately, Harry manages to quietly broker an insurance policy. One of Richie's goons, who also happens to be having a steamy little affair with Vron, gets blackmailed into helping. Harry cracks the guy's phone using the world's most secure passcode, which is 1 all through 6. Who was this guy? A toddler with a burner? Harry digs up incriminating photos. Between the dirt and a wad of cash, Harry convinces him to stash some guns on site, just in case. Meanwhile, Brendan's out trying to impress Serafina. He shows up uninvited, flashes some uncut gems like he's auditioning for a Guy Ritchie remake, and floats the idea of a buyer who just needs a little financial help to make things happen. Serafina, however, isn't dazzled. She wants 80% of the commission if she's going to get involved. Brendan tries to haggle, but he's clearly in over his head. Negotiating with Serafina is like playing chess against a shark, underwater and out of oxygen. Back in the city, Alice rings up Jan and asks to meet. During their chat, Jan casually drops the bombshell about the funeral, and Alice immediately relays the intel to her police handlers. Every move now has eyes on it. The funeral arrives, cloaked in tension and grief. Maeve has already started drinking before they even reach the church. On the way there, Eddie, ever the agent of chaos, tries to sow distrust between Harry and Kevin, questioning their loyalty. It doesn't work, but the intent is clear. At the funeral, the Harrigans show up in full, trying to keep things respectful. But Eddie, true to form, starts making a spectacle. He refers to Richie as Richard with all the passive-aggressive smugness he can muster and even leans in to kiss Ron on the cheek, which goes over about as well as expected. Nothing like a funeral flirt to liven up a eulogy. While Richie delivers his speech, Maeve whispers to Conrad that Richie's staring him down, trying to humiliate him in front of everyone. Conrad snaps back at her, loudly enough to turn heads, and the drama level spikes. Later during the wake, Eddie vanishes upstairs and starts poking through rooms, having a bit of sniff and looking for something to escalate. Harry catches him in the act and gives him a verbal beatdown that strips away all his bravado. It's not a fight, it's a domination. Eddie backs down, at least for the moment. But downstairs, Harry walks right into a visual standoff as Richie continues burning a metaphorical hole through Conrad with every glare. Then Maeve takes it up a notch. She approaches Vron and tries to start something, but Vron brushes her off with a casual insult, calling her ugly, though with just enough finesse to make it sound elegant. Maeve, insulted and already drunk, gets back to her glass, unaware that the drink's been spiked to keep her from going full nuclear. Before passing out, though, she still manages to give Eddie a subtle nod. It's a signal, and Eddie responds by accidentally bumping into one of Richie's men trying to provoke a fight. Richie steps in quickly and diffuses the situation, instructing one of his guys to drive Eddie home. The whole encounter is painfully awkward, like watching a dog in a dinner jacket try to crash a black tie gala. Finally, Conrad and Richie have a private word. Richie calmly reveals that he knows who killed Tommy. The club owner spilled everything. He says he doesn't want a full-blown war, but makes one thing absolutely clear. If Eddie shows up anywhere near his people again, he's fair game. That's the deal. Richie respects that the Harrigans came, but Eddie's presence is non-negotiable. We don't get to see whether Conrad agrees to those terms, but Maeve, waking up from her chemically induced nap, is not ready to forgive or forget. She immediately calls Paul and starts spinning new plans in the background. The morning feels deceptively calm until Vron heads to her car, ready for a casual trip to the shops. She shuts the door, turns the key, and the entire car erupts into a massive fireball that kills her instantly. Looks like the wake wasn't the only explosion scheduled for this week. In the wake of Ron's fiery demise, Richie is hollowed out by grief, his rage and sorrow simmering beneath the surface, while Donnie, ever the messenger of ill-timed diplomacy, pulls Harry aside to relay a message from Cat McAllister. But before Harry can even begin to parse through that, the news of the bombing spreads like wildfire, sucking all the oxygen out of whatever room it enters. Gina, meanwhile, finds herself yanked from her psychology exam at the worst possible moment, and as she's bundled away, she shoots her father a glare that could curdle concrete. Harry, though, has bigger things on his plate and quickly regroups with the rest of the clan at Conrad's sprawling estate. Tensions are already boiling over, and Kevin wastes no time confronting Maeve, certain that she orchestrated the hit on Vron. But just as accusations begin to swirl, Conrad cuts through the noise, smug and unbothered, as he takes full credit for the explosion. It was supposed to be a contingency, a plan B in case things went south, but Richie's disrespect pushed him over the edge. So he pulled the trigger himself, detonating not just a car but any chance of diplomacy left on the table. Plan B apparently stands for blow everything the hell up. Far from regretful, Conrad is energized, practically salivating at the idea of open war, convinced they'll outgun Richie's crew. Kevin, however, is less than thrilled, and he reminds his father that without Archie, their connection to the Mexicans, the very allies Conrad had hoped to charm, is severed. And now, with Richie furious and volatile, they're charging headfirst into a full-blown turf war with no backup. As Kevin and Harry try to rein in the madness, Richie calls Conrad directly. The phone call quickly devolves into a testosterone-fueled shouting match, with both Eddie and Conrad jumping in to mock and provoke Richie. Kevin, watching it all unravel, slumps under the weight of the moment, fully aware that every effort to shield the family and prevent war has just been nuked beyond repair. Years of strategy undone by two idiots and one phone call. While the family spirals, Serafina and Brendan are nowhere near the chaos. Instead, they're off in Antwerp, knee-deep in a diamond deal with a buyer named Leonard. They've shut off their phones because what's life without suspense? And while Serafina is sticking to her usual hotel, that's a fragile thread to hang a rescue on if Richie figures out where they are first. Elsewhere, Jan and Bella sit down for a conversation that's long overdue. They vent about what it's like being partners to men who treat war like a family business, their lives hijacked again and again by blood feuds and revenge missions. Jan's patience is splintering, and the situation isn't helped when Conrad starts sidling up to Gina, whispering sweet nothings about protection and security in her ear, all while angling for control. Gina isn't naive, though. She goes straight to her mother and warns her. It's time to go. In the middle of all this, a helicopter lands with impeccable dramatic timing. Harry uses the brief pause to speak with Bella and urges her to shut down the Ant-One situation before it spirals further. She agrees to think it over, and Harry, not wasting another second, hops on board and jets off to Antwerp. Unfortunately, back home things take a turn for the even worse. Maeve, still stewing in her own cocktail of vengeance and manipulation, places a call to Richie and offers what she calls an olive branch. What she really offers, however, is Serafina's location. In exchange, she wants Brendan spared and gives up the info under the pretense of nostalgia and respect. Richie agrees, but not before dialing up the Mexicans too, possibly brokering a deal that could tip the power scales even further. When Harry arrives in Antwerp, he gains access to Serafina's hotel room, and quickly tries to get her on the phone. Brendan picks up first, immediately blocks him, and refuses to let Harry speak with her. It's clear that Brendan, desperate to prove himself, is willing to risk everything just to earn a sliver of family respect. Nothing says maturity like ignoring a murder warning to close a business deal. Serafina, sensing something is very wrong, not just from Leonard's odd energy but from Brendan's uncharacteristic nerves, quietly shares her live location with Harry without Brendan noticing. She and her brother proceed to the warehouse where the deal is set to take place. The initial meeting goes smoothly enough, with Leonard presenting as a professional, but as the diamonds hit the table, all hell breaks loose. Suddenly, gunfire erupts and the warehouse transforms into a kill zone. Armed men flood the space, shooting without hesitation and dropping nearly everyone in the room. Brendan and Serafina are left cornered, guns trained on their heads with no visible escape. Apparently, the diamond business comes with one hell of a return policy: no refunds, no survivors. Harry arrives at the warehouse expecting a firefight or maybe a botched handoff, but what greets him instead is a tomb drenched in silence and blood. Its only occupants, the corpses of cartel soldiers sprawled across the floor like toppled dominoes, and the word war smeared in arterial red across the concrete. Less a message and more a declaration of apocalypse. There's no sign of Serafina or Brendan, only the aftermath of what's clearly been a massacre orchestrated with brutal precision. These weren't just any thugs either. They were muscle for a cartel that controls the Antwerp docks, which means whoever pulled this off wasn't just starting a turf war, they were throwing a match into a munitions dump. Unsurprisingly, it's Richie's handiwork, and when Maeve discovers he's taken Brendan hostage as insurance, she tries to pull rank and threatens him. Richie, as usual, greets that warning with the maturity of a child. He hangs up without flinching. When Richie hangs up, it's not a conversation ending, it's a threat escalation. Back on home turf, Kevin and Conrad gather to take stock of their rapidly deteriorating reality, essentially standing in the smoking crater of their plans, trying to guess which rat set off the bomb. Despite the obviousness of it all, they still haven't clocked that Maeve is the mole, though the way Conrad talks about his last betrayal victim in 1988, a tale involving some serious medieval energy, makes it clear that when he does find out, someone's getting turned into mush. Meanwhile, Jan gets a call from Alice, who's looking for a favor and pretending this is just two ladies catching up. Jan, unaware that Alice is actually a police informant with a whole tech team listening in from outside, heads to a nearby pub, only to be followed by Conrad's guy Paul. Inside, Alice carefully dances around the subject of Harry's activities, pushing gently toward the topic of killers and gangsters. But before she can get anything useful, Paul steps in, shuts it down, and reminds everyone that asking too many questions in this family gets you answered with a shovel. He escorts Jan home afterward and subtly grills her in the car, but Jan keeps her cool, sticking to the story like it's been laminated. At the same time, Bella is making her own moves, trying to resurrect an alliance with Antoine after previously getting steamrolled by Harry, who reclaimed the USB drive and left Antoine feeling used and discarded. She manages to tempt him back to the table with the promise of a 20% cut and a meeting with the Home Secretary, though the atmosphere between them is more ice rink than handshake. Meanwhile, Bella clocks Kevin lurking outside making a call of his own, this one to locate the care home where Rigby, the abusive guard from earlier, is tucked away. Kevin's revenge list is now organized alphabetically and laminated. Across the lawn, Eddie and Gina sit together, swapping stories about how lost they feel, which in Eddie's case is just an elaborate pickup technique. Gina, ever perceptive, calls him out for mirroring her emotions in some clumsy emotional con job, but despite the critique, they end up sleeping together anyway. Nothing says emotional intelligence like criticizing someone mid-flirt before still hooking up. While all of this unfolds, Harry goes full lone wolf commando, storming the UC cartel's base in broad daylight and kicking off a full-blown war zone. It's loud, bloody, and effective, and by the end of it, Harry has answers. Serafina and Brendan aren't just hostages, they're now bargaining chips in a deal gone nuclear. Back in the countryside, Maeve continues her game of brinkmanship with Conrad. She tells him she's received a text from Richie confirming he's got the kids, but when Conrad asks to see the message, Maeve doesn't produce anything because there's nothing to show. She's winging it, and the only thing keeping her from being vaporized is the sudden call she receives from Harry. He's tracked the location of Serafina and Brendan and found out they're currently being held by the Lopez cartel, who are working with Richie. Without Archie, the Harrigans' only link to these players is severed, and now they're in a deal with the devil with no one left to negotiate on their behalf. Serafina and Brendan, meanwhile, are very much alive, but barely. Tied up inside a cold, empty warehouse, Brendan is slipping fast, mentally unraveling and emotionally gutted. Serafina tries to steady the situation, assessing the facts and realizing, based on the scale of the bloodbath at the Diamond Exchange, that Richie has been playing everyone. Brendan, still clinging to denial, can't accept this reality, until a man walks in holding a tablet and a horrifying array of tools, including a chainsaw. Jaime Lopez, the leader of the Lopez cartel, wastes no time establishing just how little patience or mercy he operates with. Serafina, thinking fast, tries to negotiate, offering to double whatever Richie's paying in exchange for their freedom. Jaime isn't biting, and he makes it crystal clear. Conrad isn't feared anymore. He's seen as a reckless dinosaur trying to start wars he can't finish. As if summoned by the tension, Richie calls in and sets up a twisted little FaceTime with the Harrigans. Kevin, Maeve, and Conrad are forced to watch on a video call as the chainsaw revs to life and Jamie proceeds to brutally, graphically, and unapologetically slaughter Brendan on screen. Just as it seems Serafina is next, the call cuts out, because in the nick of time, Harry has pulled the right strings. He contacted someone named Kat, a woman with enough power to bring even this situation to a halt. Though whatever leverage she used came at a steep cost, Harry now owes her a favor, and considering the kind of people she seems to deal with, it's safe to assume this isn't the water my plants while I'm out of town kind. Harry saved the day, but he just signed a contract written in blood, favors, and regret. Conrad and Maeve sit in the quiet ruins of memory, reflecting on the day Brendan was born and the dreams they once nurtured for him. Dreams now reduced to smoke and blood ever since his life was ended in a warehouse by a chainsaw. There's grief, but no room for softness. The family business doesn't allow mourning when vengeance is already overdue. Serafina, shaken but alive, is handed over to Harry, while Kat, who somehow managed to save Serafina's life, now finds herself indebted to Jamie Lopez, a man whose kindness is measured in spared lives, not spared bullets. Harry escorts Serafina back to the Harrigan estate, and as they arrive, Maeve watches from the upstairs window, her gaze icy and unreadable, already calculating what this girl's survival might mean. Inside, Serafina breaks her silence and confesses that she had tried to broker a deal with the Lopez cartel, thinking it could benefit the family. There's a brief pause, just enough for the guilt to fill the room before Conrad responds, assuring her that none of this was her fault, and making it clear that as far as he's concerned, the blame lands squarely on Richie's doorstep. If Richie had a doorstep, they'd already be lighting candles and loading rifles on it. Maeve then enters, unexpectedly warm, and embraces Serafina with a mix of maternal grace and strategic calculation. She comforts her, affirms that she is truly a Harrigan now, and vows that Brendan's death will be avenged. There's sincerity in her tone, but like everything with Maeve, it's laced with layers. Once the women exit the room, Harry levels with Conrad and reveals that in order to get Serafina out alive, he had to cut a deal with Kat McAllister. This name doesn't sit well with Conrad, who immediately wants to know how Harry knows her, but Harry doesn't fold. He only shares that Kat approached him 2 years ago with an offer to defect to her side, an offer he declined. That's all Conrad gets. Wasting no time, Conrad moves to protect the rest of the family. He's relocating Eddie, Bella, and Kevin to a safe house, though oddly enough, Jan and Gina are staying behind at the estate. Perhaps it's trust, perhaps it's bait, but either way, the wheels are turning again. Conrad also wants Harry to set up a meeting with Jamie Lopez, hoping to get intel on the fentanyl trade and maybe even cut a deal with the very man who butchered his son. Kevin, upon hearing this, nearly implodes. The idea of breaking bread with Brendan's killer is so absurd it teeters on satire, but Conrad isn't joking. He even wants Kat's elite security detail brought in to fortify the estate. Meanwhile, Jan informs Harry about Eddie's deepening relationship with Gina, which sends Harry straight into confrontation mode. When he walks into the bedroom, Eddie postures with confidence, but Harry's ice-cold calmness disarms him faster than a headshot. Harry tells him he'll support the relationship, but adds in that signature dead-eyed tone that one day, when Eddie least expects it and feels invincible, Harry will push him off the mountain. It's less a blessing, more a prophecy with a countdown. Harry then goes to Gina and lays it all out, warning her about Eddie's violent past, only to be met with a shrug and an unsettling bit of self-awareness. She admits she's just drawn to men who remind her of her father, because nothing says emotional maturity like choosing lovers from your trauma scrapbook. Elsewhere, Alice's Academy Award-worthy turn as a helpless civilian has brought a new player into the mix, former Deputy Chief Inspector Colin Tattersall. 30 years in the force, now freelance and brought in to advise the flailing cops on how to dismantle the Harrigan Empire. Colin immediately dismisses the current plan to go after Jan, calling it amateur hour. He insists that with a family this embedded in every system, the only way in is through Richie. Work with him, not around him. Back at the estate with Harry en route to London, Conrad has Jan call Alice under the guise of a friendly dinner invite, because nothing's ever casual in this house. Later, he also speaks with Bella and plants the seed that she should keep tabs on Kevin. In this family, love means never needing a wiretap. Maeve, meanwhile, is multitasking betrayal and pharmaceuticals. After tucking Serafina into bed with sleeping pills, she marches off to Kevin and casually mentions that before dozing off, Serafina declared herself number one in the family. Kevin, too seasoned to be spun like that, dismisses the bait and heads out. He's got a different mission in mind. He arrives at a care home and flips through the visitor's book, finally finding the address where Rigby is holed up. As Harry drives to his meeting, he speaks to Freddy and drops the bomb. The king is dead. He tells Freddy what he already suspects, that Maeve is the one really running the show now, not Conrad. Freddy, spooked, says he wants out, but Harry makes it clear that retirement isn't an option. He then dangles a wild plan. He and Kevin will organize a coup, take over the Harrigan Empire, and remove Richie entirely. Before Freddy can do much thinking, Harry pushes him off the roof. Therapy's expensive, gravity is free. Harry then heads to Kat, who agrees to Conrad's meeting terms, though not for Conrad's sake, she's doing it for Harry. And now, with 2 favors owed, Harry's tab with her is getting dangerously steep. Meanwhile, somewhere in a private location, Richie receives visitors. Fisk, Mikasa, and Colin. They offer him a lifeline, help them bring down the Harrigans, and in return he'll get immunity and a 10-year countdown starting from the day Conrad gets convicted. The deal sounds appealing until they overstep and tell him they own him. Richie responds the only way he knows how, by shooting both Fisk and Mikasa dead on the spot. Colin, unfazed, assures Richie that he was telling the truth. Richie doesn't belong to the police belong to Richie. And just like that, Richie agrees. The game's no longer about law versus crime, it's about who's better at wearing both costumes at once. Eddie wakes up to the last thing anyone in the Harrigan family ever wants to see first thing in the morning. Conrad lurking around like a nightmare in a 3-piece suit waiting to talk. And when Conrad wants to talk, it never ends in brunch and closure. Eddie, emotionally scorched from whatever conversation just took place, breezes past Jan in the kitchen, ignores her entirely, and wanders outside with a mug of coffee where he stares down the family dog and asks it who's got the better deal, him or the caged animal outside. Nothing says existential crisis like comparing your life to a depressed Labrador. Elsewhere, Kevin's gone completely rogue, consumed by a vendetta that's been simmering since the start. Disappearing off the grid, he hatches a plan to finally confront Rusby, the man responsible for the abuse Kevin endured in prison. Posing as a taxi driver, Kevin picks up the older man and takes him home, slipping into the house under the guise of being helpful, until suddenly the politeness dies and the rage takes the wheel. Kevin lays it all out, forcing Rusby to reckon with what he did, but the confrontation hits an unexpected snag. Rusby's memory is mostly mush beyond 5 years ago, leaving him genuinely confused and slightly apologetic. He even questions whether Kevin imagined it before assuring him that he's since found faith. Kevin, breaking under the weight of grief and trauma, pulls out his gun, sobs into the silence, and then pulls the trigger, executing Rusby with a single shot to the head. Back at the estate, Conrad and Harry are laying the groundwork for a deal with Jamie Lopez. Conrad, ever the wild card, jokes about planting a Tommy gun in the bathroom just in case things go sideways. And the scary part is no one's sure if he's kidding. Either way, the meet is happening, and expectations are about as low as morale at a Harrigan family reunion. When Jamie arrives, Serafina attempts to act as peacemaker, jumping straight into negotiation mode, trying to spin this into a workable deal. Jamie, though, barely acknowledges Conrad and addresses Harry directly, reminding him that the previous favor, the one that spared Serafina, was for Kat, not him. Conrad bristles and tries to assert authority, giving Jamie 4 hours to decide whether he's in or out. Jamie, cool as a glacier, simply looks at Harry and says he understands why he'd want out of the Harrigan mess entirely. That sound you hear? It's Conrad's ego bursting like a cheap balloon. This little insult stews in Conrad all the way back home, where things only get worse when Maeve pokes the bear, warning him not to do anything stupid at the upcoming dinner with Alice. Her tone drips with menace like a mob boss giving friendly advice. Meanwhile, Alice is practically glowing after her deep dive into undercover work and orchestrated chaos. Following the deaths of Fisk and Mikasa, Colin Tattersall is now running the operation, and he knows the look of someone addicted to danger when he sees it. He appeals to Alice's ambition and adrenaline, encouraging her to plant evidence inside the Harrigan estate in exchange for a career-defining promotion and a generous payday. Because if there's one thing more corrupt than the criminals, it's the cops trying to catch them. Elsewhere in the Lion's Den, Maeve corners Gina and delivers one of the most terrifying monologues of the season, ordering her to leave Eddie alone. She threatens her with such unfiltered, operatic malice, specifically promising to eat her eyeballs, that Gina bolts like she's just seen a ghost with a carving knife. Never forget, Maeve doesn't threaten. She promises with seasoning. While that storm brews, Bella meets with Antoine and coordinates something shady involving traffic patterns and the Home Secretary, all while Antoine casually wears a hidden camera on his tie, because nothing screams subtle like strapping an FBI starter pack to your chest at a criminal summit. Everything comes to a head at the Harrigan estate dinner, an event that is less about food and more about strategic warfare and formalware. Colin, monitoring from afar, listens in via Alice's bugged phone, relaying updates to Richie, who has a tactical unit on standby, waiting for the signal to swoop in the moment Alice plants the evidence. Richie, ever the pragmatist, seems fairly confident that Harry won't get caught in the incoming crossfire, which, in this family, qualifies as affection. But before the police can pounce, there's one more hoop to jump. Jamie agrees to the Harrigan alliance, but only if Harry confirms that the rat inside the house has been handled. Harry, who already knows who the mole is, now faces a tight deadline to neutralize them before everything blows wide open. And just to keep his calendar full, he also has a meeting with Kat the next day at 5 p.m. to settle his side of the deal. Dinner kicks off without Gina, who's not feeling well, which is code for still recovering from being eyeball threatened by a sociopath. Maeve, on brand, opens the evening with a disturbing little speech about the fragility of marriage, comparing it to an egg, and casually places a hand on Eddie's thigh in a moment so deeply unsettling that he looks like he might crawl out of his own skin. The omelet metaphor was bad enough. Then came the touching. Serafina cuts through the madness and questions Alice directly, asking why she's not more afraid given where she is and who's around her. Alice deflects, but Maeve doubles down, pressing so hard that Alice reaches her limit and excuses herself from the table, if not the entire planet. That's when everything starts unraveling. Conrad confronts Maeve, and what starts as bickering escalates into open hostility. Meanwhile, Harry quietly slips away and finds Alice mid-operation, caught in the act of bagging evidence. The moment their eyes meet, the charade collapses. Alice drops the bluff, admits everything, and Harry, perhaps out of pity or calculation, lets her go. And when she disappears into the night, he doesn't breathe a word of it to Conrad. Back in the dining room, Maeve and Conrad are still at each other's throats when the front doors burst open and the police finally make their move. Both Conrad and Maeve are arrested, dragged out of the estate in handcuffs. But not before they start singing and laughing as if this was all part of the plan. Getting arrested while harmonizing is peak Harrigan energy. Kevin stands in a storm of blood and broken calm, talking to Rusby's lifeless body as if it could give him some form of closure that's long expired. What spills out is less a confession and more a pressure cooker blowing its lid. He's known about Bella's connection to Conrad for some time, and he's also long been burdened with the truth about Eddie's real father. That father is Conrad, not Kevin, and it's this tangled knot of secrets and falsehoods that has finally ruined every inch of his composure. He's been doing everything he can to keep the facade together, but now, with blood on his hands and the past nipping at his heels, he realizes something had to give. Turns out therapy by corpse doesn't offer much in the way of healing. Harry arrives just in time to find Kevin on the edge of the abyss. He wastes no time bringing in his cleanup crew to deal with the mess, specifically the disposal of Rusby's body, and then the two of them roll out to the docks. There, Harry's got another loose thread to tie off: O'Hara. As it turns out, she's the true mole inside the Harrigan Circle, a ghost in the machine who's been feeding Richie information for over a year, fueled by a cocktail of fentanyl and betrayal. She's been whispering secrets through the cracks, but something doesn't quite add up. While Harry listens to her excuses, he realizes she's missing key intel. She's never mentioned what happened with Archie or the Antwerp operation, which means she can't be the only mole. Richie might trust her, but Harry's not ready to play by the obvious rules. Instead, he decides to use her, pushing her right into Richie's arms as a Trojan horse, the bait in a trap that hasn't even been sprung yet. He lets her walk, throws in a vague promise to call, and watches as she disappears, dazed and suspicious. With Conrad and Maeve behind bars, the chessboard is suddenly wide open, and whichever family moves first, Harrigan or Stevenson, could take control of the entire game. That reality starts to take shape when Kevin visits Conrad in prison. Their relationship, already on thin ice, begins to crack as Kevin drops the bomb that O'Hara is their rat. But he doesn't stop there. Kevin tells him that he's done following orders, done covering up Conrad's messes, and he's now going to reshape the Harrigan legacy in his own image from the top down. Conrad tries to brush it off with his usual brand of smug sarcasm, but Kevin isn't joking. This time he's deadly serious. The student has become the teacher, and the teacher's locked in a cage. Meanwhile, Maeve, operating behind glass but still laced with venom, tries one last time to twist Eddie to her cause. She urges him to kill Harry and then take out Serafina, pitching a vision of a new royal lineage with herself and Eddie as the unholy monarchs. In the process, she drops the final puzzle piece. Conrad is his biological father. It's a truth bomb that detonates Eddie's entire worldview. Spinning from that revelation, Eddie heads straight to Bella, barely containing his rage. He confronts her viciously, shouting about all the lies and demanding to finally be treated like a man instead of a pawn. His anger spikes just after Bella sees breaking news on TV. Her father's criminal dealings have been publicly exposed through damning leaked recordings. Bella tries to apologize for the mess with Conrad, but Eddie's past patience has long since burned away. He lunges at her, wraps his hands around her throat and starts choking her, hard enough to kill her, until one of Harry's men lands a gut punch that knocks the breath and fury out of him. Eddie's new coping mechanism, strangling his problems. Elsewhere, Kat reaches out to Serafina, proposing a new kind of alliance. One based on shared interest rather than bloodlines. Serafina's intrigued, willing to listen. At the same time, Alice's deal with Colin comes to a shocking end. He double-crosses her, has his men drug her and whisked her away while giving Richie the green light to proceed. Colin has been Team Richie all along, and Alice was just another sacrificial piece. Things might appear settled, but Harry has one final ace up his sleeve: O'Hara. He calls her and outlines a plan. Let Richie believe he's in control while he's unknowingly marching straight into a trap. Richie's men arrive at O'Hara's office expecting a meeting with Harry. But they find no Harry, no Paul O'Donnell, only silence until Paul hits the trigger from afar and blows the entire building sky high. More of Richie's men are ambushed at the safe house and the rest are picked off as they try to flee through the woods. Meanwhile, Harry and Kevin make their move and storm Richie's bar. There, Kevin doesn't hesitate. He shoots O'Hara dead on sight and then puts Richie down without ceremony. In the aftermath, they uncover a recording from Alice's car, one that includes the evidence she planted earlier, something they can now use to secure the release of both Conrad and Maeve. But rather than act immediately, they choose to let them rot a little longer in custody. Colin eventually arrives with the police and walks into the wreckage of Richie's empire, stunned by what he finds. Later, Harry meets with Kat, who lays out her own offer. Help her eliminate the entire Harrigan family in one coordinated sweep and they can build something cleaner and better. But Harry, loyal to his own bitter end, tells her to go f*** herself and walks out, sealing his allegiance to the family, flaws and all. In the end, Harry picks blood over logic. Back at the Harrigan estate, Kevin speaks to Bella about what comes next. He wants her at his side not just as family but as a partner. Bella, who's known about Kevin's sleepless nights and prison nightmares, tells him she pieced it all together long ago. He talks in his sleep. Then, in a brutal moment of honesty, she admits her father violated her throughout her childhood, a revelation that goes a long way in explaining why revenge was never just a game to her. This raw, painful exchange forges a new kind of bond between them, scarred but united. Meanwhile, Harry finds himself back with Jan and Gina. But the warmth of the reunion turns cold in an instant. An argument breaks out over what's happened and what the future holds, with tensions high and resentment boiling over. In the chaos, Jan grabs a knife and stabs him directly in the chest. Harry barely flinches before dropping into a chair with the blade still buried in him. He jokes that she finally has his full attention. If getting stabbed was on his bingo card, he just won blackout. Somewhere behind prison walls, Conrad is already staking his claim. He walks the yard like he owns it, basking in applause, clearly preparing to rebuild his empire, one shiv at a time. Thanks for watching till the end as usual. Make sure to watch some of my other bangers if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next one.